again. So we're going to be going through a number of questions that were previously submitted to us, but there will also be an opportunity to ask supplementary questions. But we need to realize that for each of you, your experience of parental alienation is unique. So that is to say that the questions that you ask us will be related to your unique experience rather than kind of people's general experiences. But we are going to respond using those typical experiences rather than things that are unique to you. I should also add that all of the questions and answers that we use that we'll be talking about, they're all kind of interconnected together. So when we're talking about the experience of your child, the experience for you, the experience of the alienator, all of those things are actually deeply interwoven. You'll see what I mean once we go through these questions. And also, I'd just like to add that for some of you, hopefully you'll get a lot of value from today's session, but it might be that you might need additional support afterwards. So I'd encourage you to go and seek that. The agenda today is we're first of all going to have a bit of an introduction from Deborah around Parental Alienation Awareness. So this is the charity that is hosting this afternoon or hosting this morning. We're then going to provide some contextual information, and then we're going to put the questions that we've received within that contextual information, because I think that will make it a lot more relevant for everybody. And as we've mentioned, if you have additional supplementary questions, please put them in the chat box. We'll try to get through some of those time permitting, and then we'll just do a summary at the end. So Deborah, would you like to quickly introduce yourself and introduce everybody to Parental Alienation Awareness?
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks so much for being here. So welcome to Parental Alienation Awareness. This is a UK-based charity that's been going for a number of years. It has a very comprehensive website, which is very easy to navigate. So please do take a look. It's paaawareness.co.uk. So with the charity, there's a lot of, we require a lot of help with fundraising. There are events that are listed on the website. So anything from dog jumps, bungee jumping, walks, runs, all sorts of things, anything that you can think of to help raise awareness. You know, we're always seeing stuff on the news, how people are coming up with creative ideas. So if you have any ideas, if you want to talk to the organisers, just please do get in touch. The support line is open and our helpline is open Monday to Thursday between 6 and 9 p.m. So that helps for people who, you know, maybe are working and need private times. So option 2, when you ring 02037781171, option 2 is the helpline, and option 4 is legal advice. So do bear that in mind and take a look at the website. So to help the campaign, this issue, people need to also approach their MPs, and there's a very useful template on the website that people can use to send to the MPs, because there's so much awareness raising that we need to do around this. And also as well, if you want to distribute leaflets in your local area, then please email at info@paawareness.co.uk. Okay, that's it for now. I'll pass you back to Charlie.
Great, thank you, Deborah. So we know about Deborah, now a little bit about me. So many of you do actually know me already, but I'm an alienated parent. I went through 10 years of what I would call pre-alienation, which was a period when my ex was actually beginning to establish undermining me as a parent and creating the negative narrative for my children. I've subsequently been through a further 15 years of alienation, which means to say that not only have I successfully rebuilt relationships with my children, but I'm still dealing with some of the after effects, because they have been emotionally scarred by this experience, and they still need me as a parent to adapt my parenting style to accommodate their needs and be supportive of them. Just for completeness, I'm also a step parent to alienated children. So I'm married to Emma. Some of you may have come across her as well. She does a lot of the work on the posts, or a husband and wife team. Emma was also alienated from her kids. I'm glad to say she's also restored those relationships. So we've seen it from both angles, and it was certainly a great bond for our relationship. We also provide daily posts on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. I would like to think that a number of these posts are insightful and helpful for you as parents who are experiencing parental alienation, and that it will help you get through your own experience. So I'm a parental alienation coach. I also run something called the 9-Step Program, which is an 8-week immersive course. So just before we start answering some of the questions that you previously submitted and you might submit today, I'd just like to take you through 3 key areas of alienation. But first of all, again, just to reiterate, everybody has a unique experience. So your children are unique, you are unique, the alienators are unique. And so you are each going through a very dynamic situation. But the great news is that there are other people who've also been through similar experiences to you. And that means we're able to draw upon that spectrum of experience to find answers that work for your specific situation. And that then gives you a roadmap that will help you specifically. But looking at that broader environment as well, parental alienation is very complex. It's very counterintuitive. And as parents, we all tend to make a lot of mistakes just because when we first encounter parental alienation, it's something that's completely alien to us. It's not something that we have much history or understanding of. And there are lots of moving parts. So we've got the children who are involved in parental alienation. We've got the alienators. There's a whole lot of psychology involved in all of this. We've got child protection services and CAFCAS, and we also have the law. And you're trying to navigate all of those things all at the same time. And something I'd just like to point out, which is relevant to the questions that come up next, is the people who are supposed to be safeguarding our children, is the psychologists, the lawyers, CPS, the legal system. They are not actually trained in the way that we would like them to be. And it's primarily because parental alienation has not actually been recognized yet as a real phenomena. And until that happens, these professionals are not going to receive sufficient training so that they can be effective in helping us. We will come across more of that in a second. But first of all, I'd like to ask Jack to introduce the first question, which was sent to us earlier on. So over to you, Jack.
Hi, everybody. I'm certain that my child is being alienated from me by my ex. And the social services say that there was little that they could do. And the court seems to be angry with me for bringing this up. The question is, why are these services not dealing with this?
Great. Thanks you, Jack. So this comes back really to the fact, as I was just saying, that because parental alienation is still not recognized as a phenomena, and this has been around for a very long time. Back in the 1980s, Dr. Richard Gardner created the Parental Alienation Syndrome tag. Unfortunately, that tag has been demonized to some degree, and Dr. Gardner was personally attacked for the concept of parental alienation. He was accused of being a paedophile, amongst other things. And so the tag of parental alienation syndrome has died away, but parental alienation as a theme has continued to be continued through. There are certain practitioners, Dr. Childress is a good example, who is not fond of the title, but we do need something to kind of hang this concept on. So parental alienation has survived, but the psychologists still haven't recognized it. So until such time as that happens, it's not going to appear on the curriculums of the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the counselors, the therapists. And the people who are relying upon all of those services, so that includes CPS, social services, CAFCAS, lawyers, and judges, are also not going to be recognizing it. So basically, the problem that we have is that nobody is being educated and trained on this, which is one of the key reasons that Deborah was saying for people in the UK, they should be reaching out to their MPs. And for people in the US, you should really be looking to the local advocacy groups, because if you want to influence changes to laws, you need to do it at a local level rather than at a federal level. So this basically is why social services are saying they can't do anything about this, and why the judges are getting angry because they don't actually have a legal framework that they can use. And importantly, they don't have precedents, because the judges always use previous cases as their examples from which to make judgments. Not always, but typically. And without those precedents, they feel very uncomfortable. Back to you, Jack.
Right. There's a lot of questions coming in, actually, so thank you, everybody. And remember to put the 3 question marks at the beginning. So this question right here: after a fact-finding hearing, the court found my ex guilty of parental alienation, and it's been 17 months since my ex took my children from me, and they're still refusing contact. So why is there no consequences for these kind of behaviors?
Again, there is going to be a bit of a theme here when it comes to the legal issues. Part of this problem, again, is this lack of recognition. Whoops, sorry about that. Part of it is the lack of recognition. But another one of the issues is that the courts seem to be very slow at actually enforcing parental alienation. And this is a major issue for all of us parents who've gone through this experience, because a lot of the time the judges will they will take what our children are saying at face value. So if our children are saying that, you know, we're a bad parent, or if they're saying they want to spend more time with the alienating parent rather than us, rather than looking beyond the behaviors and the actions of the child, they just accept everything as it is. So until the courts are actually trained into how parental alienation works, they're not going to be effective. But also, right now, they are just terribly bad at enforcement. Mm-hmm. So it's an unfortunate case. Did you want to add anything to that, Deborah?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I particularly experienced myself. I didn't mention before, I've been alienated for 11 years now from my only daughter, and I had exactly that kind of experience at the courts. The judge wasn't informed. The CAFCAS were, again, no help. I mean, they interviewed my daughter, who had been staying with her father for a brief time prior to the hearing, and basically she said almost exactly what he'd said, and it wasn't even discussed. There was no questioning. She was questioned for about 5 minutes. She parroted exactly what her father had told her, and that was it. There was no digging in. There was no kind of and one of the things that I found so hard was that there was no follow-up. I requested follow-up, I requested mediation, and it was just refused. And I mean, it was partly because the age of my daughter. She was pre-16, but 15, and very often we find that children who are even 12 to 13, their views are taken very into consideration by the court more than the parents. And the most important thing is to have as many facts as possible about behaviors, rather than actually stating that you understand that you're being parentally alienated, because actually the courts don't like being told that because they've got no particular remit. So I would be very wary about citing it, but describe the behaviors of what's happening and take notes.
Mm. And something that I don't think we received a question on, and part of today is also to help address what hasn't been raised as much as what has been raised, is the whole area of false accusations.
Yes.
And this is something that we see, I should say, wherever we're talking about the UK, the same thing applies everywhere else in the world, especially in the US and Australia and Ireland. Um, the false accusations is something that repeatedly get used by the alienators. And it's very frustrating for the parents who get accused, because we basically end up spending the next few months, often at great expense, without having access to our children while we prove our innocence.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of that process, there seems to be virtually no punishment for the person who's made that false accusation. So it's another fundamental flaw in the legal system that, and some of the alienating parents are sort of serial accusers. They will on multiple occasions accuse us of sexual abuse, of psychological abuse. We even get accused of parental alienation ourselves. And until such time as the legal system addresses that as well, it's another reason that the alienators are just going to get away with their behaviors. And so, Jack, should we continue with the questions on this section and then see if there are any related questions? I think we've got another 3, including this one.
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, not funny, but is what you said earlier on just now about just some of the things you've been saying. There's actually questions coming up that have been asking those. So you're answering some of the things that people are asking already. This one question now, we've previously attempted contacting a solicitor, but this made everything worse, and contact ended up being stopped by my ex. Plus, I lost a lot of money. And this has been happening for 5 years. The question is, so what other options are there?
So I think the first part of this is understanding what's going on with the alienators themselves. So we will be talking a little bit more about them shortly, but alienators are very insecure, very vulnerable people. Now, that might not be the way that you classically experience them, but that is the reality. And as insecure and sensitive people, they have a lot of triggers. We have a lot of triggers, but they have some big ones. Anything to do with court is one of those big triggers. Anything to do with money is a big trigger. The end of your relationship is a big trigger. You going back to court to get more time with your child is a big trigger. So what many of you will have experienced is when your alienating exes get triggered, they increase the level of alienation. So you have to think very carefully about what is going to be the impact of you taking an alienator to court to try and have time enforced, or to try to get additional time, or try to make changes to your arrangements, because sometimes it can have a very detrimental impact on your relationship with your child. In terms of kind of the other options that are available for you, I'm afraid this is very limited, really, because the law is intended to be there to protect you. You can try and find, and this is one of the challenges that many of you will come across, a lot of the people who are representing you simply don't have an understanding about parental alienation. So a lot of the time, the solicitors and lawyers won't actually have a deep understanding of what it is that you're facing, let alone having the ability to convey that in a way that's appropriate to a court. And as Deborah said, and I might get you to reiterate this a little bit, Deborah, you shouldn't be talking about alienation. I think maybe if you can just add a little bit further to that, because that is relevant here.
You shouldn't be talking about alienation to your child.
No, generally to the lawyers and the courts.
No, absolutely.
Unless they do understand it, and you can take advice.
Yeah. I think the problem is it's not only because it's ironic, really. It's quite a triggering subject itself, and a lot of the terminology, as Charlie said previously, is kind of under question. A lot of people mention coercive control, which of course it is part of, but why we still kind of move towards parental alienation is because it actually does describe the difference between estrangement and parental alienation, which I know Charlie's going to talk about further. But I think that it is very unfortunately at this time it's pretty detrimental to mention parental alienation unless you have maybe a solicitor or someone that who is very up on this, and there are a few, so don't feel like it's a kind of lost cause. And the more we raise awareness, the more this kind of understanding will be accepted, and that's what we're trying to do. But yeah, it's another battle that we have to fight, and it's a lot to contend with. But as I say, the most important thing, document the behavior, try and emotionally contain yourself and be very clear about the facts and the behavior that you're witnessing your children experiencing and what the alienator is doing. Stay one step ahead, as I know Charlie will talk more about as well.
Absolutely. And to the degree, I think one of the things that has yet to be really brought out is that children naturally want a relationship with both parents. And all of the research, the psychological research with children goes to show that they want to have a relationship with a parent, even where the parent has been verbally abusive, psychologically abusive, physically abusive, sexually abusive. And in all those instances, they still want to have a relationship with that. And the proof is in the pudding, because our children still want to have relationships with the alienating parent who is abusing them. And yet they side with that person rather than us. And these are things that the courts just are not seeing through at the moment. And it does come down to training. So I think
Distinct markers, aren't they? They're distinct differences that, as you say, somebody can be abused and they will still want to be with the alienator. But if you, as the targeted alienated parent, they don't want anything to do with you. And that is such a flag that is not being recognized, and that's what we need.
And this whole thing, the voice of the child, which is used against us, because again, the courts and the lawyers and the psychologists take everything at face value. They don't look beyond what should appear as being unnatural behavior on behalf of the children. So I think we've got one more question, Jack, and then if there are sort of complementary questions that people have been putting into the chat box, I'm very happy for Deborah and myself to take those as well.
Brilliant. Okay. There's quite a few of those questions coming up as well. We might not be able to answer all of them, but there's a lot and very similar ones as well. This question right here: my ex abused me for 20 years, and social services and courts are agreeing with the voice of the child, which is just what you've been talking about, and will not award my children back to me. I don't want to walk away because of the children, but my life is unbearable. So what do I do?
So this really, although it was put to us in the form of a kind of more of a legal question, this really is about you as a parent, because we face this really difficult challenge that we can see the damage that's been done to the relationship with our kids. We can see the damage of going to court for everybody and the cost that's involved, and the fact that the courts are listening to this voice of the child. And just very quickly, for people who are not familiar with this, the voice of the child is essentially typically where they get anywhere to 12, 14, 16, that sort of age range. And it depends upon the jurisdiction as to what point in time they start listening to the child. But the courts give the child the opportunity to express their views as to where they would like to spend their time. And of course, this plays straight into the alienator's hands, because the alienator is putting pressure on the kid. The child then feels compelled to parrot this view to social services, CPS, to lawyers. They will make affidavit statements, and even in statements to judges, about their preference to stay with the alienator, which is all out of fear. So you can't, there isn't really a simple solution or an easy solution that can persuade the child otherwise. It puts the child in a virtually in an impossible position, really, a very fear-based position. And so you as a parent need to make a very difficult choice. And sometimes that choice is you do need to give the child the space and the time, and you might need to walk away for a period of time. Uh, I appreciate how difficult that is to do. I've done it myself. When I did it, I didn't know when I was going to see my child again. And it was 2 years before we had contact again. And that was a very uncomfortable, horrible time of my life. But actually, it was the most loving, giving thing that I could possibly do, and that you guys can possibly do for your kids. If you're forced into that situation, sometimes it can be better to actually walk away and let your child come back to you at a later point in time. And I realize there are risks involved in that, and we will be covering that as well. But I think if you do find yourself in that situation and you have to make that choice, you should see it as a gift of pure love that you're giving your child. Was there anything you'd like to add to that as well, Deborah?
The one thing that I would say is that whilst there is a fear from the child, there's also they've a lot, because the manipulation is so clever. They align themselves with the other parent because they're given a kind of binary opposition. So suddenly you, as the loved parent, suddenly become they listen to the narrative, and they feel very attached to the other parent because they think, how could that other parent do that? You know, they've been sold another narrative. So whilst deep down there is a fear, because the fear is that they would want both parents obviously in their lives, their security is with, unfortunately, the alienator, and their fear is also about losing that, what they consider is their safety net, but is actually their entrapment. So you know, I would just,
The
yeah,
gilded cage.
it certainly is. Yeah.
And Jack, did we have any supplemental questions that we can cover at this stage?
We did. One of the last ones right there was, who made first contact, Charlie? You or your child?
It was me, but yeah, I waited. I think I waited for a year before I tried contacting her again. Nothing. And then I did it sort of every 3 months. And then after a period, well, after the end of the second year, that's when she felt that she was comfortable having a very initial engagement with me. Something that helped enormously as well was the fact that she had a very close relationship with my other daughter, and I'd already successfully rebuilt that relationship with my older daughter. So I think that helped me enormously, because when you lose contact completely with a child, it can be very difficult to reestablish that link, and you are waiting for them. So yeah, it's a tough period, but for a lot of people, it's also a transitory period. And I would encourage all of you to have hope and faith that when you do go through those periods of no contact, it is something that is hopefully transitory. Were there other questions related to kind of this section, Jack?
Yes. We kind of touched on this one, sort of, but what are the success rates, and do the age ranges have any implications on that?
Yeah, so again, these are very, very much, everybody will have a unique experience of alienation, and the dynamics of your relationship with your child to the point that you go no contact, what the alienator is like, the child's character, all of those factors will come into play. So there's no sort of standard answer that goes with this. Clearly, the younger that you lose contact with your child, the harder it might be to regain contact. As a rule of thumb, a lot of children do reach out after the point in time they're more independent from the alienating parent. So quite often this can coincide with them going to college or university, It might be when they gain a job, or they're just becoming a little bit older and more independent. Sometimes it can happen earlier ages, 16, 17. But if a child is young, say they're only, 6 years old or 8 years old, and they go no contact, then there's a higher risk that you might not see them for a longer period of time. And in fact, there's a higher risk that it might be a very long period of time. And I'm sure all of you have come across Maddie from the Anti-Alienation Project. She's a really good example of a child who was in her mid-20s. Her brothers were alienated from, she was the person out of her family who was alienated. Her brothers weren't alienated from her dad, but she was. And it was only when she had children that she challenged the relationship she had with her mum and realized that she'd been alienated. Other children, I did an interview with Ashlyn. Some of you may have seen this as well. She was just another very good example. She was in her early 20s when she's not had children, but she realized that, again, her mum had alienated her from her dad, and sought to rebuild the relationship with them at that point in time. Was that, again, Deborah, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Well, I mean, as we've said, every case it has commonalities, but it has differences. And I think you do need to be kind of very aware of your children's age and their personality. And, I think there is benefit if there are other siblings who may or may not be alienated, because they can be a conduit. They can be a way of bridging that gap, that alienation that you have with one of your children. They can counteract some of that alienation after a period of time. But there are very specific differences. I mean, unfortunately, in my case, no other siblings, all contact with family cut off right from the get-go. Very, very extreme case. And I have to wait for my daughter. And we will talk more about how you look after yourself and your own resilience and everything else in a short while. But that's what I'd add for now.
Which is really key. Something I'm going to come back to you in a second, Jack, and ask you if there are more questions, but this next slide is actually very relevant to what we were talking about just now, because there is a difference between estrangement and alienation. And people tend to use these interchangeably, and they're completely different things. So parental alienation is where it's where somebody has, an alienating parent has very intentionally done something to damage the relationship or create negative narrative. Alienation is where a parent is or somebody, a carer, it could be, a sibling, it could even be some members of your own family. But there's somebody else outside of you who is saying something negative to try and destroy the relationship or damage the relationship with your child. Whereas estrangement is where you do this to yourself. So estrangement is actions that you take that create tension with the child. And the way that you tackle them are completely different as well. So estrangement is something that when you're trying to rebuild your relationship with your child, you can take responsibility for. You should apologize for. You should say, look, I had no idea that I was making your life so difficult. But when it comes to alienation, and this is one of the areas that I have a real bugbear with some of the practitioners out there, is because they don't appreciate that the child is being put under so much pressure that they will say things that are not really true, even in front of psychologists and other people. And it's taken at face value. Psychologists, when they're trying to reunify parents with their alienated child, often ask the parent to apologize for things they haven't even done. And this can be very damaging, and this can actually make the relationship worse, and they can make it much harder to reunify with your child again. I always encourage parents to listen when your child, if your child the golden rule, never talk about alienation to your child. But if they talk about it to you, listen to what they say. Please don't take it as an opportunity to suddenly get off your chest all of the wrongs that have been done to you. Basically, if they talk to you about alienation, it's them dipping a toe in the water, and they don't want to receive a tsunami of, oh, this is it, I finally got my chance, I've waited 5 years, I now have the opportunity to tell my child what's really been going on, they've turned a corner. No, please don't do that. Your child will back away from you, and you will probably do a lot more damage to your relationship. But what you can do is listen. Ask them about their experience. Ask them how it was for them. Don't apologize if you can possibly avoid it. And when they do come across things where you do have responsibility, because you will have done some estrangement again as well, most of us have done that, that's where you can apologize. That's where you can be the sympathetic parent.
Mhm. Can I say something here, Charlie?
Yeah.
I listened to something which I think is a very good example about how we see things from different perspectives. I was listening to a psychologist talking, and she basically said, you know, if you put a finger up, you're seeing that side of it, I'm seeing that side of it, and all the way around are different perspectives. So, you know, obviously, parental alienation is quite a different thing, but it's about understanding that there are other perspectives. So I think the main thing I would say that with your children, you don't offload, as Charlie's just said, just be curious about why they are feeling like that, why they say that. So then you're getting an inkling as well into how the alienator is drip feeding whatever misinformation they are doing. So it's a gentle querying, you know, possibly challenging, and say, you know, that's interesting that you see it like that. I'm sorry you felt that way, not I'm sorry I did that. It's distinction that
It's
is
important.
really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
Mm.
Just in terms of timing, so Jack, I know that Erica and some other people were trying to ask some questions. Can you just put them to one side? Because I'd like to move on to the section on children, because it might be that what they want to cover was we're going to cover in children anyway. If not, let's capture them at the end of that. So I'm going to carry on with some of the contextual stuff. So what you guys are all looking for is actually, how are you going to navigate the complexity of parental alienation? Because as I mentioned before, there's a lot for you to focus on. And what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get from a place of, it all seems very difficult and it's hard and it's complex, and you want to find a way of making it kind of easy. So, you know, what are the steps that you can take? And hopefully part of what we're covering today will help you to navigate this better. But typically it boils down to that you're all looking for the same sorts of outcomes. So the first thing you want to do is you're trying to rebuild relationships with your children. The second thing you're trying to do is to reduce the damage that's being done by the alienators. And I say reduce the damage because you have limited impact over what the alienator is doing. So it is an exercise of damage limitation. And the third one you should be doing, and many of you are not doing enough of this, it's restoring your own mental and emotional well-being. So depending on the level of contact that you have with your kids, your approach is going to be slightly different. So if you're currently seeing your kids, then it's all about maintaining and building that relationship. Ideally, sometimes this is just going to be like it literally is going to be like maintenance. Even if the relationship is not where you want it to be, having that regular contact is very, very helpful. It gives you some real foundations for the future at the point in time that your kid starts becoming a little bit more independent or realizes what's going on. If you're just restarting contact with your kids, then this is all about the rebuilding relationships with your children. Both this phase and where you have no contact, you're actually going to be doing something very similar, which is all about preparing for when you have contact again. So if you have very, very limited contact with your kids, you need to get ready for the time that you do actually have more time with them, because your relationship with them will have changed. And we're going to be covering that in more detail later. But they're going to be different. You have to be different. You really need to focus on what they need from you. So another way of viewing this is to, again, reiterating those three key areas. There's you, there's your child, there's the alienator. And when you're dealing between your child and the alienator, that's all about protecting your child. When you're dealing with the alienator just with you and your child is not involved, that's all about protecting you. And all the contact that you have between your child and yourself is all about rebuilding that relationship. But it comes down to looking after your kid, building your resilience, and damage limitation with the alienators. I'd also like just to cover very quickly why it's really important to look at everything from your child's perspective. Whoops. Because this will be relevant to some of the questions that you will have asked, you've asked us elsewhere. So I encourage everybody to see things through their eyes rather than through your own eyes, which is what we tend to do. We tend to look at everything through our experience. But we want to understand what our child's experiencing. So first of all, they're going through a fear-based relationship with the other parent. They have to appease that other parent, or else there's a strong possibility that they're going to get punished, which is why they adopt these coping mechanisms. They're also being fed a lot of negative information about us. And there is this thing, pre-alienation, which means that campaign of negativity against you might be starting a considerable length of time in advance of full alienation actually beginning. So when you see behaviors in your child, so they might be disrespectful towards you, they might be unruly, they might be anxious, they might be distressed in your company, what you're actually seeing is coping mechanisms and frustrations being manifested by the child. Another thing that the alienators do is they give choice to the child. And this is another manipulation technique. So they will give them options. Do you want to go and see your mum today? Do you want to see your dad today? But the choice is not theirs. So that the alienator will manipulate them to make the choice that the alienator wants. But it actually puts a lot of pressure on the child, because the child is now being asked to make a decision about, who they see, how much time they spend there, how they act. Again, that's very, very stressful for the child. And then there's also a theme of parentification or adultification. And I should just say, I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg here for everybody, but it just kind of gives you a sense of what the child is going through. Parentification is something we see a lot of. Very often when a relationship is breaking down, the alienating parent will turn to one of the children, if not more of the children, and start giving them a power. So they'll start sharing information with them. They'll start treating them differently. They'll start treating them like an adult. They'll start giving them choices. They'll start making them feel more powerful. They'll share all the information about legal aspects. They'll share information about money. They'll share information about your partners. They will make that child feel like an adult, hence the term adultification. And it changes the kid's relationship, not just with the adultifying parent, but also with you and with every other parent or every other adult. And indeed, one of the people that I'm working with at the moment recently went off to a parents' teachers' night, and pretty much every single one of the teachers remarked on how mature, as they called it, his child had become. And she wasn't being mature, she'd been adultified. Mm. So you're really going to be focused when it comes to your children on creating better outcomes for them. So the first thing you need to do really is focus on your child's needs. I talk about, with many parents, the concept of two universes. So there's the universe of you, there's the universe of your child. When you as a parent are going through a lot of hurt and pain, what happens is that you're focusing on you. And this is why I say to everybody, and you'll see this pop up in my posts all the time, you need to heal. You can't help your child as effectively when you're focusing on your issues and how you are feeling. So if you really want to help your child, looking beyond what they are demonstrating. So when they're being unruly, you have to look beyond that and say, what do they actually need from me at this point in time? How am I going to be supportive? How am I going to be compassionate? I generally also say, do not badmouth the other parent, because your child is already feeling very conflicted. And when you say something negative about the other parent, it makes them defensive about that parent. It also makes them feel uncomfortable being in your company. So generally do not discuss alienation. And one of the big issues for all of you parents is this theme of injustice. You know, it links back to the courts aren't supporting me, CPS and the social services aren't supporting me, my family doesn't understand and support me. How can the alienated get away with this? And I'm sorry to say this, but the general theme of injustice is something that you have to learn how to deal with, and you cannot raise it with your child, and it's going to be a big trigger for you. So I say to all parents, you've got a tongue for two reasons. The first one is to give you the ability to communicate, and the second one is you've got something to bite down on when you're getting triggered by the injustice. So I think, Jack, we're back to questions that are related to children. I think we've got 7 of these, and then we'll kind of add some, we'll answer any additional ones that we can.
Yeah, we've had a lot of questions as well coming up from the folk, but yeah, this one: how do I best foster a positive relationship with my child when we don't get to see each other very much?
So the key to this is, you're assuming you have contact with your child. This is going to be hard for a lot of you parents because your children are going to be difficult, they're going to be challenging, they're going to be unruly, they might be parentified, which means they feel very empowered and entitled. They will be treating you disrespectfully. They might be calling you by your first name. And so the first thing I would say is stick with it, guys. Be compassionate for your child. Try to make time with you as normal as possible. So many of you will also be doing things such as, when you have got time with your child, you'll be expecting them to spend all of that time with you. But your kid just wants to be a normal kid. So they'll be wanting to do things like being on social media. So you have to let them have some of that time with you for doing the stuff that they want to do. Because if you don't, you'll end up estranging them. So I think as well, we've talked about a number of these points about, you know, focusing on your child's needs. So your child doesn't want to talk about you all the time. They actually just want to talk about themselves. So focus on them, focus on what they're doing. If you have very little contact with your child, I don't think it's a bad idea to treat them a little, but don't go overboard, because otherwise that becomes a normality, and then they will expect to be treated every time they see you. But, you know, try to keep it as light as possible. And I would also say, expect your child to be stressful at the first point in time that they come and see you. So if you have them for half a day, expect them to be stressful for 30 minutes, maybe 60 minutes. That's because they're detoxifying. And after that, hopefully they'll be a bit better. And then they're going to retoxify when they get close to the time that they're going to go back to their target parent, or sorry, they're going to go back to the alienating parent. So I would encourage all of you to learn a lot more about parental alienation, because that will give you a lot more guidance. I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg, give you a lot more guidance on the things that you can do that will positively help you to rebuild those relationships with your child. Should we move to the next question, Jack? And Deborah, please chip in whenever you want.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm also looking at some of the questions as well that are coming in, but
Cool.
yeah, I concur. I just think really you've got to, as Charlie just said, you know, allow your child to decompress, if you've got younger children particularly, and actually any age, I would say when you do get a chance to actually have personal time with them, do things that are kind of multi-sensory, so they kind of actually enhance the memories for the children. So like baking cakes or something, so there's smells, there's texture, there's fun, all that kind of thing. Build up those times, because if you are estranged from them or alienated them for a very long time, it's like little triggers like that that will potentially be remembered. So, do an activity together, go out, even if it's a walk, and you mention certain kind of flowers or memory, try and contextual, kind of intensify your time in a gentle way, but something that's memorable. So that's, yeah, just a thought that came to mind.
Yeah,
What's the next one, Jack?
Next question. Right, Charlie, I'm blocked from a child on the phone and social media, and they don't respond to letters, and my ex has previously sent back gifts. So how can I have a relationship with my child through indirect contact?
So this is one of the hardest things, I think, for any parent to go through, because the question says indirect contact. The reality is you don't really have contact with your kids at that point in time. Very often the blocking is on social media and telephones is as a direct result of the alienating parent who's putting pressure on the kid. The kid doesn't want to block you, but they're being forced to do that. If they don't, if you're not blocked, by the way, but and you do have the opportunity, send texts to your children. Never say you miss them, but send texts 2 or 3 times a week, and just find something very light to say. And don't expect them to respond. If they don't respond, it just means that they're not being given permission to have that relationship with you by the alienating parent. More importantly, if they are receiving a text, they can kind of say to, or they can explain away to the alienating parent, yeah, I couldn't stop mum or dad from sending me the text, but if they respond, they've crossed a line, they're now siding with you, and that will get them into a lot more trouble. So that's why they don't respond. Equally, they won't respond to letters because those have probably been intercepted by the alienating parent, as are the gifts. So I would encourage each parent, even if you don't get responses, keep sending these things, because sometimes they occasionally get through. In terms of how do you have an indirect relationship, there are very limited options. You can try and go through schools, you can try and go through relatives, but there's not that many options available to you. I'm sorry to say that. And let's keep going through these questions at a bit of a pace, Jack, if that's okay, because I'm conscious we've got 30 minutes left and there's quite a lot that I'd still like to cover.
Go back to that one, sorry. Okay, one of my 4 children is listening to lies about me, and it's massively affecting our very close relationship. So how do I deal with this?
Again, this is going to be one of the challenges that many of you will be facing. Of course, when our children start hearing negative narratives about us, there comes a point in time when they start believing it. This is a phase that's slightly ahead of something called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is basically where your child is being told one thing by one parent, but their experience of you is completely different. And they struggle with having 2 kind of versions of the truth in their head at one point in time. So your children become very confused when they're dealing with you. And because they have to appease the alienator, they start taking on board the idea that, well, maybe you might be a bad person. All of us have also learned through repetition our limiting beliefs in life. And it's only because our parents or our grandparents or other people, especially when we were young, kept saying the same stuff to us again and again and again and again and again. It's exactly the same thing with our children. When they hear things enough times, they start to believe it. What you can't do is you can't turn around and have a straight conversation with your kid and say your ex is basically putting negative narrative into their head, that they're being brainwashed. Your children will find that deeply uncomfortable, and you'll actually end up estranging them. The thing you can do is what I call role model, where you become the person that you want them to experience. So this is you being very consciously aware of how you conduct yourself, what you say, the way you present yourself, the way that you treat other people, because your children will still pay attention to how you show up, and that's your best tool. You will even find that your children will parrot some of the positive attributes that you bring to that relationship, even when on the surface they appear to be very alienated. So I would encourage any parent to go and look at that concept of role model.
Right, next one. Sorry.
No, I was going to say cracking on, Jack.
Right, okay. Court order, right, for a time with my child. And this time's been disrupted throughout the last 6 months since the order was granted. And recently my child has told me that they were being told to misbehave when they're with me by my ex, and their behavior towards me is getting worse, as well as the things that they're saying. What can I do about that?
So I think this actually is very similar to the last question in reality. I guess the big difference is just the disruption through the disruption since the order was granted as well, because disruption I take to read from this question as being that there is interference in the time with the other parent, which happens a lot. So the alienators love to have the opportunity to reach out and text your children, phone your children, find other activities for your children to do when they're supposed to be with you. The bad behaviors are, we see this a lot of the time, where the children, they kind of feel the need or the ability to say to us, oh, I don't need to do what you say, or I don't need to listen to what you say, or your rules in your house don't apply to me, or you've got stupid rules. And that is basically parentification again, or adultification, as well as alienation. So I think, for the sake of time, this is basically the same question as the previous one.
Right, okay, there's so much noise about how I should proceed. So, do I ignore my children and wait, or do I keep popping up in their lives? So far, popping up is either ignored or it's treated with contempt and hostility. So how should I handle this? The goalpost keeps shifting. And does personality disorder in my ex determine how I proceed? And furthermore, one child at least seems to be assuming the role of alienator in tandem with the alienating parent.
Great question. Lovely and complex in the fact that there's the different elements to it, which are all really, really relevant. So the catch-22 that a lot of you parents will be facing is the time that you spend with your children can be quite confrontational and quite difficult. So when you are with them, they might demonstrate some degree of hostility. I would say continue seeing them as much as you possibly can. Bear with it, because if you have no contact, that's much harder for you to maintain the relationship with them. So even if it's tough, keep thinking about, what is my child going through? The fact that they're even seeing me is a positive. Even if they're frustrated and angry, they're actually seeing you. That is much better than having no contact at all. So again, using the techniques we were talking about earlier, about really focusing on their needs and being supportive to them and being a role model, all of those things will help you. There's lots of other techniques as well that we don't have time to cover here. But there is a lot that you can do to kind of help to rebuild that relationship, or at least to maintain it. The X, and we will cover alienators very briefly in a moment. your ex and what they're like is so important, because they are all unique. They have typically experienced some sort of trauma themselves when they were very young, which has created the insecurity and vulnerability, which results in them being manipulative, coercive, controlling people, because those are their coping mechanisms for how they deal with the world. So if you can understand what it was that created those traumas in your ex, it'll give you a lot of insight as to how and why they're trying to control your children in the way, in the way that they do. So if some parents, for instance, have been brought up in alienating parents have been brought up in very unloving, unsupportive environments, so they're a bit dehumanized as a result of it. If you can try to identify what they experienced, you will probably see kind of not relationship, but you'll see a link between what they're doing to your children and what they've been through themselves. And the last part of that question, this is alienation again. So in this case, it's one child is working in tandem with the alienating parent. So what's happened is that child's become the focal point. They have been empowered, they've been alienated, or they've been parentified. They've basically become the consort for the alienating parent, and they become a person who now sees it as almost their responsibility to make sure that the other children follow the alienating parent's desire, which is to all turn against you. And it also changed the relationship between that child and their siblings, because that child almost becomes a parent themselves and is given authority, which they never had with the other siblings. And it changes their relationship for life. We see this a lot. It's very common.
Yeah. Right. Here's one. I've had no contact with my child for several months, but now I realize the alienating process started a year ago, which is what you mentioned earlier on. I'm devastated and I don't know how to help myself out of this situation. So how do I protect my younger child so that this can't happen twice?
A lot of this is going to depend upon the nature of the next child. Very often, the younger child is more attached to the parent. Sometimes, I mean, this could just be because this child is less amenable, less persuadable. They might be a little bit more independent. They might have had a stronger relationship with you in the first instance. But I would encourage all parents to, again, do everything you can to kind of maintain the relationship with your child before the alienation gets worse. So if you see your child starting to be uncomfortable or disrespectful with you, try and talk to them a little bit about their experience. Try and ask them, how they're feeling. You don't want to talk about alienation, but you might be able to kind of tease out of them a little bit about how the relationship is with their other parent, or are they hearing anything about you which is concerning for them and they might want to talk about. But most of all, be compassionate and be supportive and caring towards that child, and that will almost certainly help you to reduce at least the pace at which alienation might set in.
Right, big long question right here. I've got 3 children, and my ex doesn't allow any contact with me. The youngest ones have been told to block me with any phone contact, and one of my children has anxiety. When one of my children secretly calls me and turns to me for help, they're stopped immediately by my ex, and it's having a detrimental effect on them. And again, what can I do to help them?
Again, this has parallels with some of the earlier questions. So I think the key difference here is what can you do differently that will help you to have contact with the child that has reached out. So as a general rule, where your child does still have the ability to have contact with you, so that some of them have actually blocked this this parent in this case, but one child does still have that ability. If they do it from the alienating parent's home, that is a very high stress environment. And as is happening here, the ex normally, they're very controlling over our kids. They monitor our kids. They even check their telephone bills because they're normally paying for the telephone bills because they like to have it that way as well. So if a child is trying to have contact from that home environment, that will be the highest risk and most stressful place for them to do it. So I would encourage the child to wait until they're out of the house or wait until the parent is out of the house. Maybe have conversations during breaks at school. You know, school is a great place where they get quite a lot of time where they can have a conversation which doesn't rely upon, sorry, where they're not being monitored by the parent. So I'd say find occasions where the X is not there, and encourage the child to have contact at that time. Are there questions, additional supplementary questions, Jack, that you probably have quite a few related to this section? Maybe we can answer a couple of those and then move swiftly on again.
Yeah, I think this one right here, that's not actually directly related, but I think is completely significant, about having a central advisory service. There's a lot of groups around, a lot of parental alienation support groups, but are we working together in collaboration? And it really needs to happen. Yeah, these comments have been made quite a lot.
Yeah, this I've got a personal view on this. One of the biggest problems we face is there is a lack of coordination, both within countries and across countries. So some of the bodies that have responsibility for recognizing parental alienation as being a real thing or a pathology, some of those are international, but some of them are local. So in America, for instance, you have the DSM-5. So in the States, the coordination and the change, I think, needs to come at state level in the first instance, and then see if there's something that can be done at a federal level. For the UK, again, we're broken up into different jurisdictions. So we've got Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the UK, where we all have slightly different laws. There is the potential for these to be garnished together in one place. But the big problem that we have is we don't have dedicated resources looking at the matter of parental alienation. And if we had that, in my view, that would be a game changer. So I have actually done lobbying in a previous life. So I've worked with the government, and I know that the thing that makes the difference is funding. Because when you get funding, you can put dedicated resource onto it. When you get dedicated resource, you can make sure that you've got support, you can make sure you've got the research, you can start the education of the people you're trying to influence. And the people you're trying to influence, by the way, change all the time. So it's not just the law, not the lawmakers. It's in England, we've got MPs. The ministers change all the time. The advisors to the ministers change all the time. The civil servants change all the time. And so even if you're making progress with some of the audience that you're trying to persuade, they are constantly shifting. So what I would encourage people to do is think about how we can actually get funding, because the rest of the solution will come from that. I mean, it'd be great if we can pull together various organizations on a charitable basis, but in reality, I think that's going to be very hard. I hate to sound negative about any of this stuff to everybody, but I'm enormously pragmatic and try to be very practical. What else do you have, Jack? Maybe one more, and then we'll move on to the final sections.
Okay. Somebody asked earlier on, how can you defend yourself without bad-mouthing the other parent?
Being the role model is your singular most powerful mechanism of demonstrating to your child who you are. The second thing I would do is because you can't have an overt conversation with your child about alienation, and it is not advisable to it's not advisable to constantly spending all of your time defending yourself. You can try to be more subtle and saying to to your child on certain occasions, you know, this is, as Deborah said, you know, there are two sides of any, you know, argument, opinion, perspective. You can talk about the fact that, you know, your ex has one view and that you have a different view, and that, you know, some of the things that you're being accused of or being suggested about you, you know, they're not really true. But you need to be very careful that you don't end up constantly having this conversation and constantly defending yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, limit the time that you do, because otherwise you'll estrange yourself from your kid. And I hate to say it, but you have to take on board a certain amount of the criticism and just let it go past you, because otherwise you'll estrange yourself. There is one more topic. Well, there are two more topics. One is about alienators, which I'm not actually going to cover because I'd rather spend the time on you guys as parents, because this is the area where I don't think there's enough focus, which is you all focus on your kids. You don't focus enough on yourselves, and you need to worry about your own healing, because everybody is relying upon you. You know, you're relying upon you, your kids are relying upon you, your family is relying upon you. And when you go through alienation, it's like this bereavement process that you go through. So you're going to be hit by waves of emotion. You're also going to get really, really triggered by stuff, and you're going to get blocked by stuff. And what's happening is that your past wounds, your past experiences, those past bad memories, they're all being brought back up to the surface again. And when you're being triggered, those are actually your past memories, or those past experiences being triggered. And when you're being blocked from moving forwards, it's because you feel uncomfortable about, for instance, accepting the reality of where you are, which is normally related to those past experiences as well. I call it the emotional roller coaster. And you get put onto the emotional roller coaster by your exes. So you're going to be feeling grief, guilt, injustice, isolation, powerlessness, anxiety, anger, and also fear. The crazy thing is they put you on the roller coaster. You self-perpetuate yourself staying on that roller coaster. So the only person who's going to get you off that is you. So until you address the buttons that the alienator is pressing, other people are pressing, and that includes your kids, because your kids will be triggering you, you're going to stay in what I call Groundhog Day, because you're just going to keep on having the same experiences again and again and again. So those negative experiences that you're going through, the grief, the guilt, etc., those are actually all personal to you. People talk about them as being quite, you know, we all recognize what grief is, but actually your version of grief is typically related to some experience that you have had in the past. Your fears are often related to some experience that you've had in the past, as are your anxieties. So it's really important for you to understand and address the fact that you need to understand what's going on in your own subconscious as to what is going to help you to heal. So, you know, our feelings of abandonment, our feelings of isolation, our feelings of injustice, a lot of those are related to past experiences that we have had. So you need to give yourself permission to heal yourself and to sort of feel good again and to move forward with your life. Because those two universes I talked about 45 minutes ago, the universe of you, the universe of your child. If you're, especially in cases of limited contact or no contact, if you're in your universe and you're feeling sad, depressed, guilty, you've got your life on hold, it doesn't affect your child's universe. If you're feeling happy, if you're life embracing, if you're making the most of the opportunities available to you, living your life, it doesn't affect the universe of your kids, but it does affect you enormously. And that also applies to where you do have contact with your kids. Because when you're feeling sad and depressed and you show that to them, that's the person that you show up as, you're going to guilt trip them. So they're not going to enjoy the time with you because you make them feel bad. Whereas, and this is counterintuitive, we all think if I turn up being happy, the kids will think that I don't love them anymore and that I don't miss them and I don't care. Actually, your kids might say some of those things to you, but deep down, they're actually much happier for you. And it relieves them a bit. So it's really important for all of you to focus on your own positive mental and emotional well-being and resilience, because when you're in a good state, you can focus on your kids. And I've said this a few times tonight or today. If you really want to help your kids, focus on what they need from you. But when you're being triggered, all the attention goes back onto you. So you're no longer being able to be compassionate, sympathetic, and supportive to them. You're now focusing back onto you. So I think we had a couple of questions related to the parenting side.
I feel very isolated, and I experience poor mental health since I lost my daughter to parental alienation. And is there any support available?
So yes and no. So the one thing I would say is if you're going to go and get support from a practitioner, so I mean a psychologist, therapist, a counselor, a coach, whatever, make sure that they understand parental alienation, because this is the biggest problem. And you know, I'm not saying, I'm not wishing to discredit any of those professions, but I am saying that in a lot of instances, they do not understand the emotional journey that you've been through. And I think that's a big difference for somebody who has been through parental alienation. So certainly when I'm working with parents, I know where you guys have been. I know what that journey looks like. I know that you need to give yourself permission to move on and to start taking your life off hold. You need permission, and there are ways and techniques of helping you to move past those feelings of grief and guilt. And a big one for women is shame, less so for men. Women, you know, I really feel sorry for you guys, because the people around you don't understand alienation. And so they think that there must be something terribly wrong with you in order that you don't have your kids with you anymore. What they don't understand is that the only person who's got something terribly wrong with them is your exes. And it's their issues that have created the alienation. So yeah, there is support available. Please do find somebody who's got the experience of parental alienation. They can really help transform your experience, because once you get into a place of healing for yourself and an understanding of what your children are going through, it will help you to move into a far more positive mindset. When you do that, it will change your emotional experience. And that will literally transform how you tackle parental alienation. Yeah, Deborah, please.
Yeah, I mean, yes, there is support out there, but as Charlie said, be really careful about who you choose to help, because sometimes it is the advice, as we've been discussing, is counterintuitive. You know, you don't tell your children, so that is probably counterintuitive to a lot of therapists, you know, advice that they might give. But in terms of your own mental well-being around parental alienation, just like with this charity, there are a lot of there's a lot of advice out there. There's a lot online. There are other charities as well. I just think you need to just spend a bit of time, do a bit of research, and talk. As today, you know, you're all chatting on the chat. We are connected. We understand what this experience is like, and that's what you need. You need people like that, and you need small incremental steps to help yourself. So reconnect with what made you before you even had your child, what activities you like to do. Exercise is vital, you know, creative outlets, try writing, try doing, you know, just take it slowly, step by step, and recognize there will be waves. You will crash at times, you will be triggered, but just keep building on those elements that will strengthen you and attract your child back to you for being the best person you can be.
You can absolutely make this change. Every single person out there today, you can absolutely make this change. And I really can't emphasize that enough. And I see so many parents coming onto various groups and sites, and you can be very disillusioned. A lot of people are very angry. It's a very emotional journey. You can absolutely change your mindset. And when you change your mindset, you take your power back, and you take it back from the alienator, you restore it for yourself. It will absolutely transform your experience of alienation. I promise everybody that. I think we've got one more question that was pre-asked, Jack, and then we see how we go. Then we might have time for one other, and then we'll have to close down.
Right, yes, okay. Yeah, I've heard some people also say there's so much to process. There absolutely is. Can I mention one thing as well?
Mm-hmm.
You are still parents. Don't forget that at all. And part of everything that you're doing, this is you parenting in a strange kind of way. So anyway, this question, we've been told that we must now wait until the children are old enough to be free from my ex's influence, as there's nothing anyone can do. Being an alienated parent is lonely. What strategies will help us cope with this and move forward?
So I think this is kind of a classical instance that many people will be in with. This sounds like kind of a no contact case. The thing I would say to every parent who's no contact: get back on with your life today. Don't wait another day. You do have to deal with the reality of where you are right now, but never give up hope. Hope is the thing that will drive you forward, and hope is a place I genuinely hope that every single person will get to. Reality is the road to hope, and the reality today for this parent is you don't have contact with your kid. But back to those two universes: if you're sad, miserable, and depressed, it doesn't help your child. It only affects you. So every one of you will be on that emotional roller coaster. So you need to work on the things that are making you feel the grief, the guilt, the shame, the injustice, the isolation, the powerlessness. When you work on those things, you can get rid of every single one of those negative feelings. And you can literally start recreating, and you should start recreating, what version of me do I want to be? Exactly as Deborah was saying, what is the life I want to live? And look at it this way: you were always going to be empty nested. At some point in time, your kids were always going to leave you. You were always going to have to recreate yourself, recreate what your life was going to look like. So you're just doing it earlier on. Yes, it's unnatural, and yes, you're missing out time with your kids, but this was always going to happen to you, and you would lovingly want them to go forth and live their life more, fully as a young, independent adult, and you were always going to be left to one side. So start getting on with your lives now, today. Don't waste today, because the crazy thing is, every day that you're sad, miserable, and depressed, your ex is winning. You're doing their job for them. You're doing exactly what you're being, where they want you to be, and that's madness. And it might feel uncomfortable at first, saying, "Okay, I don't feel comfortable enjoying myself or even giving myself permission to be happy." That's exactly where you should be happy. You should be life embracing. And until you are in that space that you're happy and life embracing, you're not going to be healed. And until such time as you're healed, you can't help your kids. So if you won't do it for yourself, do it for your kids. And that's a big permission breaker for a lot of people. That really helps them. And I'm just conscious that we have actually hit our time, and at some point in time, the technical aspects of this are going to stop working. So we should probably move to a close. So Deborah, did you just want to do a quick
Recap,
update
really?
on
Yeah.
PAA?
Yeah, so just again, guys, I'm sure you all aware, it's Parental Alienation Awareness is the charity. We're obviously based in the UK. Lots of fundraising activities already done and evidenced online. We've got a support line and a helpline, and they're open Monday to Thursday, 6 till 9. The number is 0203777781171. Hope I've read that right, because I sometimes have numerical problems. So option 2, when you call, is the helpline, and option 4 is legal advice. And there's lots of resources, as we've said, on the website and throughout the net. Please campaign, approach your MPs. It's absolutely vital, as we've said, to get a more unified awareness across the board, really. And of course, if you want to distribute leaflets, they're available as well online to print up, or we can send them to you. So yeah, just thank you everyone for being here. And I'm so sorry, there are a number of questions that, you know, love to dig into a bit more, but we can't just in the time available. But hopefully if you get hold of the helpline, we can have a chat about other things as well.
And we will be back. So a big thank you to everybody who came along and joined us today. We really appreciate you coming along. We will be doing further events together, and we'll be doing slightly different formats because we want to try and keep it all fresh. And we'll make an announcements about that quite shortly as to when the next one will be. But as both Jack and Deborah, who thank you very much, both of you, for all of your help and support today. As both of them have said, you guys are great parents. Please always remember that. You know, it doesn't matter what people have said about you, what the ex is saying about you, what your kids, your friends, your family. You guys are all wonderful, wonderful parents. You know, and please give yourself lots of love and TLC, because you really deserve it. You all really deserve it. So on that note, I shall wish everybody a great evening, morning and afternoon. And we will see you guys hopefully in the future.
Thank you.
Take care.